Good morning. My name is Craig Clayton, and I'm really excited this morning about the opportunity to be able to share with you on a topic that is both personal for me as well as a professional endeavor. And it deals with this topic of bullying in the workplace. What I want to do, first of all, though, before I jump in to start covering some of this material, is to just give you a heads up. I've got about 10 pounds of stuff to put in a 5-pound bag, only my dad used to say that just a little bit differently. And I'm hoping that this doesn't end up seeming like you're drinking from a fire hose relative to the information, but I want to get as much into your hands as possible, and I have a couple of ways to also do that even after this event. Many of you know me through the diversity work that I've done over the last 20 plus years. 20 of those years was spent as the Director and Diversity Strategist at the University of Houston's International Institute for Diversity and Cross-Cultural Management. I've also been doing consulting work domestically and globally for the last 20 plus years. I am very proud to say that I am now a Blue Beyonder, a part of Blue Beyond Consulting. I encourage you to take a look at their website, get a better idea of some of the services that we provide, but not yet after we get through this webinar. I was going to have the founder on the call with me, but ran into some technical glitches, so Cheryl, please forgive me for that. It was definitely not an intent. Let's get started here. Relative to my background, just to share a little bit, I'm currently the Chief Diversity Officer, as well as the Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Consulting Practice Leader at Blue Beyond. As I mentioned, I've spent over 20 years at the University of Houston, running the Institute for Diversity. In that capacity, I created the country's first university-based diversity management certificate program, where we brought cohorts through that training and have led hundreds through the curriculum. I've also done consulting in a number of capacities for at least 100 of the Fortune 500. I've also put over 20 countries under my belt doing this work. I've been able to finally put pen to paper on one book, and the other is just about done. The first one that is finished is called Being Tolerant is for Cowards. It's intended to be an opportunity to demonstrate leadership thinking to disrupt that status quo we seem to get locked in with purpose. The quote, "Being tolerant is for coward," actually comes from a comment that the CEO of AT&T made. The second book I hope to have finished in the fourth quarter is just about done. It deals with this topic on bullying in the workplace. Let's keep moving. This is just a representative sampling of some of the organizations that I've done this work with. It's not intended to imply endorsements by any means, but just to show the depth of the work and the various industries that this work is being done in. Not all bullying specific, but across the diaspora of this work. Some of the topics we're going to cover include the following. Setting the stage, which is what I'm going to do for you here in just a second. Let me start my timer as well so I can keep an eye on this. We're going to talk about the topic of courage and comfort, mindset and collusion. We're going to make sure we've got some clear definitions on what's the difference between bullying and harassment and just having a tough boss. We're going to talk about the different types of bully bosses and what some organizational solutions are, some strategies for eliminating bullying, how is bullying linked to corporate culture, and then to give you a few insights about what it is that we do here at Blue Beyond relative to this topic. So let's jump in and get going. Oh, quick housekeeping issue. Keep your cell phone handy because I'm going to provide you with a couple of QR codes at several intervals because I know this is a 90-minute session and I don't expect everybody to stay on board for the full 90. But what the QR code is going to allow you to do, not this one that's on here, so don't use this one. I don't even know what that'll do. I didn't try that. It is intended to give you an opportunity to download a PDF that's a white paper that covers these topics we're going to be talking about. And for those of you who do stick around for the full 90 minutes at the end of the webinar, I'll put up a second QR code that'll allow you to download a free excerpt of the book, specifically Being Tolerant is for Cowards. It's in PDF form as well. So again, keep your phone handy. So let's deal with this topic and jump in. Bullying at a very high level from just a statistical perspective happens 4 times more often than illegal harassment. This has been dubbed literally an epidemic. Many bosses target their top performers, as I'll share some statistics. It's happening in every industry, every state, every city, every country, and in every organization, even yours. I also want to take a moment to say welcome to those who I know have joined us, specifically a number of both transformation professionals, talent, as well as HR professionals from Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Cape Town. I'll be following up with you afterwards if there's any information I can provide, because your journey's a little bit different in terms of some of the legal aspects, but it's not different at all in terms of behaviors. Continuing. There's two key words I want to lift up as we go down this journey today. I've been doing this work for over 25 years in a lot of industries, and as I mentioned, in many countries. One of the things I've learned is that there's two key words that have a huge impact on the topic of workplace bullying as well as corporate culture. One of these is missing. The other key word is one we have to start eliminating. Both of them start with the letter C. The words are courage and comfort. I found a quote that I love. It says, "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone." And I talk with executives all the time about the issue of being culturally competent and stepping outside of their comfort zone. And for those who are people leaders, there's an expectation that you'll step outside of your comfort zone. And where those areas of discomfort lie is often where the opportunities for growth are. When I say those two words, comfort as well as courage, think of it this way. Mindset is connected to both. If you think you can, you probably will. If you think you can't, you probably won't. Context-wise, stepping out of your comfort zone absolutely takes courage. And that self-tape that we have is what we have to start working on first, and especially in this topic of bullying, because of what we see, what we experience, and how we respond. So it's really about your mindset, or unfortunately having a set mind. That self-tape leads to action or inaction. And the difference between being a target and being a victim is also mindset. I'm going to talk about that more later. Those two words, courage and comfort. I want to take just a second because I'm not chastising anybody in this conversation. I have been there myself. In another life, I used to work in radio and television, not at this particular station, but I did some work there as well. I had to make a stand. I had to make a choice. It's actually how I got involved in doing this work. I sat in a meeting as the only face of color in the meeting at the senior level and listened to a consultant who came into the market to advise the particular radio group that the FCC was going to be coming in to inspect the public files to make sure that they had indeed been making a best faith effort to hire from the community in which their monopolistic license to broadcast was now allocated by the FCC. Ironically, the law did not require these stations to hire reflective of the markets, just make a best faith effort. This consultant said, "I've reviewed your public files and you're not going to pass mustard, but here's what I'll do. I'll tell you how you get around it. First of all, I want you tomorrow, because you've got 2 months before they get here, maybe a little less. Tomorrow, I want you to run an ad in the Miami Herald. And in that English-speaking paper say, we're looking for people who want to work in radio and television. We're looking for board operators and engineers, very technical roles." And then let the resume start to flow. And then you go to El Herald Nuevo, the Spanish language newspaper, and you run an ad in that paper that says, "Want to work in radio or television? Send us your resume." Don't mention any of the technical roles. And then you go to the African American paper in town and you say the same. "You want to work in radio or TV? Send us your resume and a headshot." Now, when you get all of those resumes in, you take the ones from the engineering job in the Miami Herald and you put it in a folder. You take the ones from El Herald Nuevo that just said "want to work in radio," and you put those in the same folder from the Miami Herald. You take the one from the African American paper and you put that in the same folder. Here's what they now have. They have a file that says those that have a Hispanic surname only wanted to hold a mic or do interviews or things that were being seen in public. They didn't have the technical skills. The African Americans, remember, they had to send a headshot because you couldn't tell with a name like Clayton or Smith if they were African American. They also were not told it was a technical role. So now when you reviewed these files from the FCC, it was easy to see why you didn't have many minorities or people of color, because they don't have the qualifications to do the technical jobs you're hiring for. But that's not what you put in the ad. I had to now make a choice. I actually raised my hand and said, are we trying to get around the rules? Are we trying to find qualified applicants? That ended up costing me not only the role that I had in that particular radio group, but I literally got blackballed in the radio business, and I'm so thankful because now I am in a space that I'm supposed to be in. Courage is not easy. And I can tell you without a doubt, there's a quote that's from Seth Godin, and it goes, no one can force you to stand up, speak up, and make a difference. But if you back off and play along, then understand whatever happens, happened, at least in part, because you acquiesced. Now, when you don't speak up, when you see the bullying and behaviors happening, what this is actually collusion. And let me give you a definition of collusion. There's 3 different types. The first type of collusion is the one that's most common, when something's said and you don't speak up. You can also now collude by denying the fact that we have any problems of any sort. And unfortunately, way too often, that's the case when people are asked about these issues of bullying. Doesn't happen here. Or when there is someone who is being bullied and something is said that you know is out of line, but rather than speak up, you give that uncomfortable laugh, which is active cooperation. All of these are collusion. And bullying doesn't happen in a vacuum. And when it happens, history has taught us what happens when we collude. Look at what happened in the height of Nazi Germany. There's a quote that came from Reverend Niemöller during the height of Nazi Germany. It said the following, and first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for the Catholics. And I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant, and then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't Jewish, and then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak up. That's what collusion is. Bullying doesn't happen in a vacuum, and today we're going to define it, give you some tools on a personal level when you see it, as well as what can organizations do to begin to mitigate these behaviors. Bullying is more than a statistic, it's personal. It goes beyond just issuing a policy statement, because people are being mentally brutalized. What if you were the one being bullied? Or what if it was your husband or wife or partner or your child on their job being bullied? Sometimes all it takes is one voice, one comment, one person. But what if you're the only one? Context-wise, these behaviors are real. Take a look.
There was always so much tension.
His yelling and screaming paralyzed me.
She quickly made it her job to take me on and make me feel less than.
The bully would yell at me, tell me I wasn't smart.
I didn't want to cry because that's what the bully wanted me to do.
How can I face people at work? I'm useless.
It was a ploy to catch me with my guard down.
I never knew what to expect.
He did this on purpose to keep me guessing.
A total place of helplessness.
This is a video from an organization called Bully Free at Work. And for those who may be looking for some additional tools, they have some incredibly powerful videos that will help on your journey as well. I'm not by any means trying to insist or even make it appear as though I have this repository of everything that is bully specific to help. This is an effort that multiple consultancy groups and organizations are leaned in on. So wherever I can be of assistance in pointing you in the right direction, consider that done. I have never forgotten this example of just how personal bullying can be. A female executive came in. We were doing a full day workshop on the topic of bullying and ways to mitigate it and change culture. And we talked about all the types of bullies, which you're going to hear about in a minute, specifically bully bosses because they're most prevalent. This young lady came in and she said to me, after everyone had left the room, she kept walking by the door waiting for a chance to come in so that no one would hear her. She walked in and she said, "My boss is every one of those bosses you've been talking about rolled up into one. And every day, once a day, I hear him coming down the hall, speaking cordially to my coworkers, but I know I'm not going to get cordiality. I know he's going to find something to rip me apart." And this is someone who is their top performer. And I'll again explain who some of the targets are from a historical and data perspective. She said, "Every day, once a day, as he's heading towards my office, I hear him coming and I pull my garbage can out from under my desk and I throw up into my garbage can." This woman was responsible for multiple PhDs within multiple patents within the organization. And unfortunately, her boss was threatened by her. These behaviors have an impact that can be significant. And there's two aspects to bullying. There's corporate bullying, and then there's workplace bullying. Let me delineate the two. Corporate bullying is the culture that the bully actually operates within. And there are attributes within companies' cultures that literally give the sign to the bully that it's okay. And the bully begins to thrive in those environments. I'll identify what some of those attributes are. Workplace bullying is specific to that behavior that is in most cases manager specific, but there are still 1 in 5 occasions that it's peer-to-peer, but it's often in a scenario where the manager has begun the bullying and the peers now assume that it's okay for them to engage in the same behaviors. We're going to focus on workplace bullying. But corporate bullying is what we as an organization do, coming in to conduct quantitative and qualitative assessments to determine behaviorally what's happening in the experiences of employees. And as workplaces are becoming more diverse, some of those same disrespectful behaviors now could potentially have a component in it that crosses attributes of difference, whether it's generational, gender, race, or any other aspect of difference in the workplace. There's also a difference between workplace bullying, illegal discrimination, and harassment. At the present time, there is no state law against bullying in the workplace. The closest is in Puerto Rico. They've passed a law against workplace bullying. Now, again, this is not intended to be legal advice, but just sharing some perspectives on these differences. Here are a couple of them. Harassment is normally something that has a physical component to it. Again, normally. Bullying is almost exclusively psychological in nature. Harassment has some aspect of your identity that you are being harassed about. Bullying is normally targeted at the person that is the direct report of a manager. It's not about race or gender or disability. They're normally targeting someone who's seen as competition. Harassment, there can be a single incident or a series of incidents. Bullying is almost always a series of incidents by its definition. Harassment, everyone acknowledges that there are certain things that constitutes harassment, but bullying, a lot of times bullying behavior isn't even recognized by other people as bullying. Harassment, when you're being harassed, you're pretty clear of what's happening to you, but bullying, sometimes it can take a while before you actually recognize what that is that you're going through. Harassment is often done for peers to approve of the behavior, but bullying is more often than not done behind closed doors, but it is becoming more prevalent out in the open. Harassment happens both at work and outside of work, while bullying predominantly happens at work. Again, there are some clear aspects of defining bullying that most of those who do this work see as consistent. There's 3 threads. 1, the behavior is disrespectful and personal. 2, it's repeated over and over. And 3, it's intentional. Every organization that I've had conversations with about the definition of bullying, the first 2 they get. The third one, I'll often be asked, how do you know someone's intent when it comes to bullying? The courts are jammed packed with attorneys trying to prove intent every day, Craig. Well, in this case, intent is the easiest. Because if someone that is a bully would change that behavior if their boss was around, that's when you know it's intentional. So are you dealing with a tough boss or a bully? But let's give you some examples. Not every tough boss is a bully. Tough management normally has a specific aspect of job performance that's being targeted. In the context of bullying, it's normally personal, and it's a character assessment, and it's demeaning and humiliating, and it's intended to have that impact. Most tough managers don't cross that line, but many get to the line and see it's easy to step over. So tough management versus bullying, how do you tell if you're the one that's got the responsibility of sort of assessing culture? Well, there's ways to do so both quantitatively and qualitatively, but there's another. One way to know whether you're working for a tough boss or a bully boss is there an undertone of fear in the organization, on the team? There's probably more of an inclination that that's a bully than it is a tough boss. Let me share just a few statistics because, as I mentioned, bullying has an array of research being done mostly overseas, but now we're starting to have studies done here in the U.S. on the topic. At least now, 37% of workers have been bullied. This number has been consistently going up. 72% of bullies are bosses. That number is closer now to 80%. 57% of the targets are women. 45% of those being targeted report health-related problems. That young lady I mentioned who every day is throwing up into her garbage can is an example of that. Bullying happens 4 times more than illegal harassment, and 62% of people who are bullied in the workplace ignore it and move on, unless it's targeted towards them. When it comes to bullying in the law, there's many parts of the world that have laws in place. And there are, unfortunately, as I said, no national laws prohibiting bullying in the workplace in the United States as of today. Now, there have been many laws that have been proposed in multiple states, and in each case, the Association of Corporate Attorneys has dumped money into those markets where those legislative leanings may have been to put it in place to ensure that it did not get put in place, with the exception, as I said, of Puerto Rico, who has put an anti-bullying law in place in 2020. Let's take a quick look at what's been happening. This is just to give you some idea if this is an issue that is important to you. There are associations in every single state that are working to try to get the law passed. What you see depicted here is the purplish color are those states where there have been what are called HWBs, or healthy workplace bills, proposed, but they were defeated. The areas that you see that are in that grayish color, there has been no legislative activity. And in 2 cases, California and Utah, there is a requirement for training for what's called abusive conduct, but there's no law against it. So again, keep in mind, there have been attempts to put some law in place, but it has been defeated in almost every case. I mentioned this topic of bullying, it's personal. I've done work in a number of different silos, both in TV, intelligence community, law enforcement, and in the military. The topic of bullying is one that's important to every one of them. And as I said, it's also personal for me. I was working in radio at one point for a bully. And this particular woman was about 4'11", African American, and we called her the Black Widow because we were convinced she ate her young. It was the worst professional experience of my life. If I walked past her office to go to the conference room to go meet with the general manager at the station who had called to me to come meet him in the conference room, as I walked past her office, I'd get this: "Hey, Clayton, where the F are you going?" "I'm heading over to the conference room." "Really? And who told you to get up from your desk?" "Well, Joe asked me to come meet him." "Joe, my boss, asked Yo A to come to the conference room and didn't tell me?" "Yes, that's what I said a minute ago." "I'm not deaf. You think I'm stupid? I heard you. But I don't believe you. How about you just go back to your desk until I figure out what's going on?" "No problem." As I turned to walk away, she said, "Did I say I was finished talking to you yet?" "Okay. Are you finished talking to me?" "I'll tell you when I'm finished. You don't ask me." Let me just make this clear. I came there looking for a job. I left there looking for a job. I'm 6'4" and 240 pounds. But it was the worst experience of my life. I'd pull up outside of that job, and if I'm supposed to be there at 8:30, I sat in my car. I'd be there at 8 because I was not going to be late. But I'd sit in my car until 8:29 and 30 seconds before I would get up to walk in that door. How much am I wasting time and losing trying to avoid this situation? Get your cell phone handy. I mentioned to you earlier, some of you may not be able to stick around for the entire call. I'd like to give you the opportunity to download a report that we've put together that takes this information, or at least a significant portion of it, synopsizes it, and put it into a PDF that you can download. So if you got your phone handy, there's 2 ways to do it. Simply point your camera at the QR code, and that will then bring up a little yellow link that you touch, and it will take you then to a page that you'll be able to download the PDF on bullying. I'll pop this up several times during the course of this conversation. I just want to make sure for those who may not be able to stick around the whole time that you get the report. Also, you can enter in that URL and it will also take you directly to that same page in case you're not comfortable with using QR codes. I'll give that a second. Continuing. Why do bullies bully? Well, the majority of the reason that they do it is because they can. And the culture allows it. And what do I mean by the culture? In some organizations, the only thing that matters is winning. And winning can mean getting the business. It can mean hitting a dollar goal. It can mean eliminating a particular competitor. But if it's a win at all cost culture, then there is nothing that stops people from making sure I hit that goal. Those cultures that have high A-type personalities have a tendency to have that win at all cost culture. Those kinds of organizations whose culture is about competition and not cooperation tend to now create opportunities for bullies to flourish. Keep in mind that workplaces are changing, and there are increased opportunities for people to be exploited. And let me be clear, remote work is indeed in some cases making this topic even worse. And people are being bullied through remote work in texts and in chats and in emails while they are on a virtual call. And there's more information that is coming out in studies on this topic as well. Why do bullies bully? Because the way the organization responds basically gives them the okay. If you are being ignored when you are literally crossing a line, then you assume the line doesn't matter. And in some cases, when now that squeaky wheel starts to have people talking about the bullying and the behaviors, rather than taking that person out, having that person get some competency enhancements, or even walking them to the gate, in some cultures, they get rewarded and promoted. That's one of those fallacies that I've often felt about people who, when they define their corporate culture, say, you know, we're like a family and this is such a great place to work, but every family I know also has some dysfunctional family members. And unfortunately, you can't fire Uncle Joe. And in many families, Uncle Joe is the perpetrator and gets promoted. So what are the top tactics that some of the bullies use? Let's take a look at some. One, they will start blaming the target for having made mistakes. They'll place unreasonable demands on the person. And there's opportunities to look at any nitpicking thing they can as a way to criticize. I'll give you an example of some of the types of bullies that do this as well. They will now say you're not following the company's guidelines or rules in any area that can be twisted to sort of use as a club. If they can, they'll find a way to threaten the opportunity for you to continue working there based on what their moving target or standards are. They will insult, they'll put down, they'll discount and deny whatever someone has done as having any value. They'll actually do things that are rather juvenile in some cases, which is giving people the silent treatment or icing them out. In some cases, they go so far as to actually steal credit for the work that was done, and we still have some of those bullies who stand up in the office at the top of their lungs, yelling and screaming at people. Now, there are multiple kinds of bully bosses, and I just want to lift up a few of them. Remember, 70 to 80% of bullies are bosses, but there's different types. Let's take a stroll through some of the kinds of bosses that might exist in your organization. Some of you have worked for these kinds of bosses in the past. One is called the gatekeeper. This is someone who's basically using the watch, the clock, as a club. They're very meticulous. They want to know what time did you leave for break. They know because they were watching you. They want to know when did you come back for break. They knew that too. They were watching. They want to know you went on a bathroom break and you were gone 20 minutes. What were you doing in the bathroom for so long? Really? They will tell you you were over there talking to that particular person in the office for 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes. How do you know how long I was talking to somebody? Well, that's easy. They're using the club the clock as a club. Additional tactics of the gatekeeper: they'll cut the target out of the loop on information so that you appear to not be able to do your job. They won't make reasonable accommodations as they will for others in the organization. They refuse to follow whatever the company's policies are or contracts with the union because they have a specific way that they want to interact with you, and they're not looking at policies and guidelines. The gatekeeper will also, on a whim, decide they're going to change the rules. I know that was a notification that was stated before you could take that day off, but I need more notice than that. I don't care what the employee handbook says. These are some who will also use the silent treatment as their way to let you know that they're not pleased. In a workshop setting, what we would do would be to have a discussion amongst those who are in the setting to know, how do you handle the gatekeeper? What are some of the things that you can do? And especially when this is your boss, how do you have a difficult conversation with your boss when your boss is the bully? But because of the nature of this conversation, all we're going to have the opportunity to do today is to share with you some of these differences. Another form of bullying is called the constant critic. This is someone who nothing you can do ever satisfies them. The quality, the timing of it, your appearance, the way you look, the way you talk. I had the misfortune of working for someone who actually utilized this as a technique. And the context of it was, I was told in this particular instance that the reason I had not been able to get any promotions, I was living in Los Angeles, a single parent. Cost of living in LA was ridiculous. The promotions were happening all around me. I had a degree in business. I had military experience. And I wasn't even being told promotions were happening until a gentleman next to me who had a degree in French, and his only expertise was as a hairdresser, and he was promoted into management. I went in and said, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, but how do I get myself in line for these promotional opportunities? The young man looked across the desk. He said, close my door, and if you really want to know, I'll tell you. He said, Craig, the reason that we don't extend these opportunities to you is because my peers are intimidated by you. You're a little too articulate. If you could dumb down a little bit when you talk, that would make it a little bit easier for us to see you as a peer. I was out of that organization within 2 weeks. Constant critics are literally looking to take you apart for any little thing that they can. They'll put you down and belittle you. In some cases, they will make eye contact or gestures to indicate their disrespect. They'll criticize the smallest inconsistency. They look for something to target. They'll interrupt the person or discount what's being said. I think we've all got somebody in our circle that as you're talking to them, they consistently interrupt. And it doesn't matter what the discussion is about, they just talk right across the top of you. Well, after that happens so often, you just shut down and stop talking. That's what the critic is doing to that target, trying to shut them down. So again, context-wise, there's another bully. This one's called the two-headed snake. This is the one that is exactly what the name implies. They will try any way they can to attack the reputation of a coworker. They work to ensure that the target doesn't get what's needed, so that now they can't accomplish their tasks. They want coworkers to support them and demonstrate through stabbing them in the back why this person isn't worthy of being treated as a peer. They'll make disparaging remarks and they'll share confidential information. They'll start rumors and try to steal credit. The next form of a bully boss is called the snoop. Some of us know who these are and might have had the unfortunate pleasure of working for one. This is someone who they think it's their job to watch you work, but they don't want you to see them watching you work. And while they're watching you, they're not watching you to confirm that you're one of the best workers they've got. They're watching to see, is there anything you're doing that they can nitpick about? They're going to assume if you're heading over to go see somebody that it's got to be social and not work. So as a result, they're automatically going to accuse you of having social conversations in the work setting and not doing your job. There is no benefit of the doubt extended by the snoop. And in their mind, they think everyone is slacking off. I remember doing some work for a company in a plant. And when we talked about the snoop, there was a clear individual who everybody perceived as that person. And he was someone who would literally spend the majority of his day watching people work. And one of the gentlemen in the setting said, sir, I want to figure out how can I get John's job? Because I want a job where my job is watching people work instead of working myself. The next form of a bully boss is what most of us will associate with a bully in the workplace when we hear the term. This particular type of bully boss is the screamer, and it's just what it sounds like. They yell, they scream, they curse. They'll say things like, I'm the boss here, do as I say. They invade that personal space that we all have by getting just a little bit too close. They intimidate any way that they can. They want to make sure that if there's anything going on in the organization that needs to be either referred to HR or sent up the line, if you would, it comes through them first. Context-wise, these are people who never show any satisfaction with anything that's done. There's always something that's not done right. Praise is almost non-existent from the screamer. They try to get people to stick around and work all hours of the night. I've heard them say things like, well, if I can stay here all night, so can you. In one workshop, we were talking about the bullies and defining them. And when we got to the screamer, everybody in the room turned and looked at one person in the room. It was an uncomfortable moment. But clearly, they were indicating he's the screamer. His response as everybody looked at him threw me for a loop. He looked at the folks in the room. He said, "That's right, I'm the screamer. And let me help you with this. I don't get high blood pressure. I give it." I said, "John, you and I need to have a conversation after this meeting. That's not something to be proud of." Another form of bully boss is the ringmaster. This is that boss who is a control freak. They will literally have you jump through hoops. And these are the ones who have no hesitancy about taking credit for the work that's been done by those direct reports. And when they hold that hoop up and tell you to jump through it, if you are able to, the first thing they want you to do is do it again, because it had to be luck. There's no way that you could do that a second time. These are people who see no one as being more important than themselves and the organization. The next is the manipulator. And it is exactly what it sounds like. Someone who is always trying to influence behaviors and actions. Some of us have worked for them before. And even if you weren't the person being manipulated, you knew who was, and you knew who the manipulator was. And you could sit back in a meeting and watch and go, "Wow, here it goes. String's about to get pulled." These are people who have, in most cases, an agenda or a motive that they're trying to accomplish, but not necessarily conveying that to anyone. These are bosses that do these things very subtly. And if there are any issues from an emotional perspective that they can leverage, whether it's guilt or loyalty or obligation, they know how to pull those strings pretty well. The next one is one that the current environment, as we're heading into hopefully what is going to be a mild recession, is going to rear its head again. And this one is the economic bully. This is the one who always dangles the job over someone's head. That, you know, by the way, we are going to be getting rid of 5% of the workforce, and that could very well mean you got to start getting your act together, and they start literally picking apart everything with the threat of being laid off with every conversation. The last form of bullying is one that's gotten me in trouble in at least 2 organizations, and I'll explain why. This bully is called the Queen Bee. And the Queen Bee is a woman who's normally at a senior position, and it's someone who doesn't use that power to help other women climb the organizational structure or to change the system where there are fallacies or areas that it's broken. These women are normally targeting other women with their bullying behaviors. I've heard comments like, "Nobody helped me to climb the ladder. Why is it my responsibility to help other women?" Really? No one climbs the ladder by themselves. Someone was wearing your t-shirt in that boardroom even when you weren't in there. Because you can wear a shirt every day that says, "Damn, I'm good." Folks see that as egotistical. But when someone else puts on that shirt and goes in the boardroom and says, "Damn, she's good," that's a different conversation. Nobody climbs the ladder on their own. I mentioned I got in trouble with this slide twice now. Each time the Queen Bee at the organization saw this particular picture, assumed, because it's tended to favor her, according to her, I didn't see it, assumed I had found a piece of clip art to look just like her to put into the slide deck so that I could bring this conversation to the fore. I promise I don't do things like that. The reasons for this Queen Bee syndrome, and there's lots of studies on the topic, I didn't create the term. Many of the studies say that these women are feeling threatened by younger women in the organization. So let's take a look at some solutions. What can be done about some of this? Couple of things. One, from an executive perspective, there are best practices. One, always take reports of bullying seriously. Investigate. Create a clear written policy about what your approach to the topic is. Don't assume that because you have something that's inferred in an ethics statement that that's going to be sufficient. Most employees, after you hand those to them, may sign it, and you couldn't get them to bring it to a meeting if it was a free week off if they found it. Another best practice is to ensure that there's a contact person so when people encounter these behaviors, they know who to reach out to. Training is needed. You have to monitor the policy, not just implement it. That means sometimes you might have to do something with a quant or qual approach to get people to tell you where they are on some of these topics. review, evaluate, update. And employees need to know that if you cross the line when it comes to bullying, there is a price to pay. And it needs to be disciplinary and clearly expressed. Another best practice is communicating that policy consistently in every form imaginable. Many of you have communications teams that can tell you all of the various ways in which this could be included. Identifying the forms of bullying and letting people know that if you have a complaint, we will keep it confidential. Because there are people who are, again, reporting their boss as the bully. That's a hard thing to have to now work with that same person. Watch out for frustrations. HR will often see there are people who are taking lateral moves to get out of an organization. Normally, when you see people doing that in mass, there's a problem. Act when the reports surface. If those tough bosses don't get some nudging when it comes to training, they can cross that line and become a bully pretty easily. And document, continue to document. There are liabilities in this case as well. As a manager, leader, or person with authority, are you being kept informed? Or are you being shielded from the information? Bullying is happening in every organization. Just mathematically speaking, it's happening in yours. Do you know what's going on, and why don't you know? I think any one of us that turns on the television can see common courtesy is not so common anymore. Can your organization be proactive when it comes to this topic? Have you moved from talking about eliminating disrespectful behaviors to doing something about it? And as a person in authority, you're the keeper of the culture. It is your responsibility. People managers, if you manage people, you have an obligation to respond when you're made aware. And responding should not be optional. It doesn't matter the size of your organization, whether you are domestic, global, business to business, business to consumer, government, private sector, military, law enforcement. Responding should not be an option. The first step should be a conversation, and these aren't easy. If you're a people manager, reach out to HR and get some guidance and insight. Have a plan, discuss the options, and continue to monitor the situation with regular check-ins. For those of you who manage people, don't assume that just because you haven't seen it, that it's not happening. But just because you're now watching to see what's happening doesn't mean it becomes a witch hunt either. And just because someone says something in a curt way, that doesn't make them a bully. Anybody can have a bad day. Bullying is disrespectful, it's repeated over and over, and it's intentional. When someone comes to you and says they're being bullied, don't go to blaming the victim. None of the just cowboy up or man up, as you would hear folks say, and handle it. Don't worry about it. It's inappropriate. Bullying is not just about tough management. The bullying trends also need to be stopped as soon as you notice it, because anything that is allowed to go unchecked continues to get worse. There's also red flags to take a look at. If you are a second level manager, look at that first level and see about turnover and absenteeism and find out what might be happening beneath the veneer of the team. And don't just talk the talk. Unfortunately, check the mirror. There's a quote that I love from Ralph Waldo Emerson. The quote goes, "How can I hear what you say when what you do speaks so loudly in my ears?" You can't tell people to stop bullying if you're a bully. Also, link treatment in the workplace to performance and expectations. And now it's not just about, are you hitting the numbers? Are we enhancing our margins? But culturally speaking, are we living up to who we are as an organization? When it comes to strategies for eliminating workplace bullying, there are mistakes that are often made as organizations begin this journey. One, often the bully is seen as untouchable. Even in that organization, when that young man was identified as the source of why this woman was throwing up every day, there were many who had an assumption that this person was untouchable because of the amount of revenue that was coming into the organization. And if the revenue generation is more important than the culture, the bully begins to feel they can get away with anything. Many times the victim is the one being blamed. I lived in Texas for 20 years, so I apologize, but the term cowboy up is what was tossed about pretty routinely to people who were being victimized or targeted. And I'm going to talk about those two terms in a moment. Consider, in some cases from a mistake perspective, they consider the bully to just be a tough boss. And after all, people are just complaining because they can't handle a tough boss. These are the way all the bosses used to be. Mistake. Never dealing with a bully who sits at the leadership table is a huge mistake. Some of the biggest bullies that I've ever met in companies have a C before their title. But yet they're telling everybody in the organization beneath them, CFO, CIO, pick a term. Some of the biggest bullies sit around that table. But yet they're telling everybody else, stop the behaviors. So if you don't firmly address what's going on at the leadership table, don't expect people out in a plant to deal with it. And you also make a mistake if you think, the bully will get over it. It'll stop. Just give him a little time. It won't stop. Mistake. Setting up a bully-free zone is one of the things that's a requirement. Employees have to know what is expected. They have to have some form of competency enhancement to understand what are the behaviors that are disrespectful. Because sometimes the bullying starts in a way that's a disrespectful behavior that someone didn't know was disrespectful. But it can escalate pretty quickly. The staff in your organization needs to understand how to deal with bullying when it happens. As I mentioned, your communications group should be intimately involved in making sure that every vehicle, whether it's TVs in the break room or text messages or any other form of communication, also includes conveying to people what our expectations are around the topic of bullying. What's also being done in many organizations from a best-in-class standpoint is creating what are called minimum behavioral standards, or RWPs. An RWP is a respectful workplace policy. And a respectful workplace policy actually defines what respect looks like in meetings or when people are communicating, and it's developed by the team of employees. So again, that is a part of what we do as well as help organizations to develop their RWPs. And just a quick side note, you as an organization don't want to then tell people what respect looks like in the workplace. Because if you're telling them, whether it's HR or leadership, or even as a consultancy group coming in and telling them this is how you should be interacting, it's deemed to be compliance because it's coming from the outside in. And any change model will tell you, if people are going to own change, it has to come from the inside out. Developing the RWPs has to be their input, not being told what to do. Happy to share more about that later. I mentioned zero tolerance policy. This is just an example of one organization that had a threat-free workplace policy. They were in the tech space. It said creative and innovative thinking abilities are a competitive advantage and depend on our ability to feel safe and secure in a non-threatening work environment where people are valued as individuals and treated with respect and dignity. Threatening, violent, or persistently harassing behavior from any source is inappropriate and unacceptable anywhere company business is conducted. That's one organization's statement. Every organization needs to be very clear if you're going to hold people accountable as to what those behaviors are and are not that are acceptable and outside of the realm of acceptable. So what can you do? Firstly, if you see it, own it, stop it. Call attention to the behavior by speaking to the perpetrator in private. Focus on the impact of the behavior. Give them some alternatives. Point to resources. If you have an employee assistance program, allow that person the opportunity to get some help. Call attention to the behavior by speaking directly to the target. Because if you've observed this behavior, and now the person that was targeted was the one receiving it, let them know that you saw it and that you want to validate that you are understanding how impactful this can be and understand how do they feel about it. Get some insight and assistance, whether it's through the direct approach, through a supervisor, HR, if you have an ethics group, Resources are available to give you some insights. I'm not a counselor, but there are people who do counseling specific to this topic. Get help if that's what you need. Don't assume that it's going to stop and go away. Now, here's another quick cell phone check-in. I know time-wise, I want to make sure that we're being consistent for those who may not be able to stick around for the entire duration. So again, get your cell phone out, point it at that QR code, push the button that should pop up on your screen, and it'll take you to the website where you'll be able to download the report that has quite a bit of this information that we are talking about. And again, if you don't use the QR code, you can actually enter in that URL that you see on screen. It will also take you to the same place where you'll be able to then download a PDF version of the bullying report. I'll give you just another second or two here. Continuing. So now let's take a couple of steps into this conversation about how do you link the topic of corporate culture and bullying? Because there's a strong connection. I mentioned there's workplace bullying and then there's corporate bullying. And in many instances where individuals are bullying within their work groups and teams, the culture has allowed that to happen. In some cases, corporate culture can create almost that whack-a-mole type mentality. You know the whack-a-mole arcade game? When you've got people in that culture that have that as that underpinning of how they feel they're being treated, then people that are in support roles generally aren't being respected. It can lead to bullying. There's double standards that exist in organizations that have this whack-a-mole kind of culture that is a standard for managers and then another standard for everyone else. Leads to bullying. When you make a mistake, in some cultures that are risk averse, a mistake can be career ending. It can also open the door to more bullying. When that good old boy club is strong in your organization, it opens up the door to bullying. And let me be clear, I'm not talking about just good old boy, the perspective of people thinking of the racist perspective of the good old boy club. Good old boys also are those people who take care of others who are people like me, people that I'm comfortable with. And when you have that kind of mentality that if you're not one of those people like me or people like us, it's easy to then be on the receiving end of bullying. When the predominant culture in the organization is arrogance and huge egos, bullying can thrive. When people are walking on eggshells and there's fear of being not only verbally chastised, but potentially losing a source of revenue, bullying can survive. And when you have a culture of not accepting new input, you know that if it's not invented here mentality, that's not the way we do things, bullying can also thrive. So clearly, contextually, there are certain links between the organization's culture and the prevalence of bullying, which is again why at Blue Beyond what we do is also to involve ourselves in doing quantitative and qualitative work to get a real good understanding of what actually is in the culture versus what you hope is in the culture. Now, there's some characteristics of a bully-prone workplace. I mentioned making the numbers. If that is the obsession that drives everything, bullying will become more prevalent. If when recruitment, promotion, and reward systems are all based on an individual's strength of personality, meaning that if you are the person who is driving what the individual recognizes as how do we now reward performance, but it's strong personalities that get those rewards, those strong personalities have a tendency to be somewhat aggressive. And those are also the same personality types that when it comes to emotional intelligence or social intelligence, there's a bit of a gap there. So as a result, that blindness creates those opportunities for more bullies because they are that proverbial bull in a china shop with very little EQ or social intelligence. Another characteristic of a bully-prone workplace is when there is short-term planning that tends to drive the organization. When everything is based on what are we doing right now, that means pressure is on us to hit those numbers at all costs. There is a long-term strategic approach needed to ensure that we're reaching the numbers in the right way, not just reaching the numbers. Additional characteristics of a bully-prone workplace: executives give higher priority to personal friendships than to legitimate business interests. Fear is dominant throughout the organizational culture, and there is a misuse of the performance appraisal process where people use it as a club and not as a developmental tool. All of these lead to more bullying. So what's the tone in your workplace? Does speaking up mean taking a risk? Does it mean you might sound inarticulate or might have your ideas shut down? That you could lose face or make enemies by speaking up? Do you run the risk of losing leverage by unintentionally committing the wrong behavior? Because it doesn't take much in some cultures to run amok. Structural problems that facilitate bullying? Several. Lack of recognition, lack of diverse and satisfying career pathways, job security. When conflicts exist between managers and professionals, broad differences in age, there's up to 5 generations in some workforces today. Gender and cultural experiences that exist at the same level of employment create opportunities for bullying to thrive. Unmanageable workloads, change, job satisfaction that isn't there creates opportunities to again voice their displeasure through bullying other peers. So what's a typical profile of someone who would be considered a target? A couple of things. One, they refuse to be subservient or controlled. They have integrity and strong ethics and high expectations for those in authority. They're sympathetic and caring. And when you look at all of these characteristics, these are the attributes you would want your people to have. But these are the attributes that bullies are looking for when they start to target those top producers. These attributes are the kinds of things that unfortunately could very well fit multiple of your top performers. So now if indeed that is the target, and that is what the profile of a target is, if you are being bullied, and based on the statistics, easy for me to say, around the prevalence of this topic, there is a strong likelihood that there are many people on this call who are being bullied. And if you're one of those who is being bullied, hear me right now. I'm speaking directly to you. And if you've heard nothing else I've said so far, please hear this. If you are the one being bullied, hear that you have done nothing to deserve being bullied. Let me repeat that again. If I'm the bully boss, I can target you. And unfortunately, way too often, you allow that to become victimization. Let me repeat this. Targeting you have no control over, but victimization is a choice. Let me take a moment to go down this path. The first step to starting to take your power back if you're being bullied, it's connected to a quote that I heard from Dr. King. Dr. King was asked to come into Memphis when the sanitation workers were asking for media attention around their plight. He said to them, I'd be happy to come and bring the national media that comes along with me wherever I go, but before I get there, you have something that you need to do. Before I can come and bring the attention with the outside forces, you need to have done all you can. And what Dr. King said to them was, first of all, you need to straighten your back up, because a man can't ride your back unless it's bent. If you're being bullied, the first step to start taking your power back is to straighten your back up. And then talk with someone, HR, a friend, a counselor. It takes courage, and it's not easy to be courageous. I had this conversation in a workshop on multiple occasions. I have heard employees who started to cry in the workshop because they were the one being bullied. I saw in workshops where others would reach over and put a hand on someone that they knew was being bullied because they also realized that they had a responsibility to do something about it. I said to you, I know it's not easy to do. And I can tell you that I've been there. Having to make a stand, having to make a choice is not easy. I was asked to go out to a town in Texas called Jasper, Texas, where a man named James Byrd was dragged to death behind a pickup truck. I was asked to do diversity training at a retail establishment in that town where one of the people convicted of the murder of James Byrd had worked at that store. And there was all kinds of tension going on in the store with people who were actually defending this young man, saying he's not really that bad of a guy, and others who were saying, are you crazy? Do you know what these two are accused of having done? And you can only imagine the tension. As I left Houston to drive out to Jasper, my beautiful bride stood in front of my truck and she said, sweetie, while you're out there, I want you to promise me you won't get into a debate with people about the merits of this trial. I said, sweetheart, if that's important to you, I'll do my best. She said, I'm not moving from in front of this truck until you promise. I said, okay, I promise. If that's important to you, I won't get into any debates with people. I'm now there and I'm doing a session in the morning and one in the evening in the motel in town. There were no hotels in Jasper. I'm talking Bates Motel. There was the office and rooms went that way and rooms went that way, all on one floor. You backed your truck up to the door in front of your room and put your stuff in your room. I completed the first session in the morning. I go back to my room and one of the people that was on trial was convicted during that window of time that I was in my room. I now go back to get a key for the training room. As I walk into the lobby, the receptionist goes, oh, you're here for the key. I said, yeah, for the next training session. She said, well, I don't understand why all these folks are coming to our town. I said, ma'am, I just need the key for the training room. She said, why are people making such a big deal out of this? Did you hear the verdict? I heard my wife's words. I wasn't going to get into a debate. No, ma'am, I wasn't paying attention. I just need the key for the training room. She said, well, they found him guilty. Can you believe that? I didn't say a word. I just extended my hand for the key. She said, well, it ain't like they dragged him that far, is it? They put a chain around this man's neck and they dragged him behind a pickup truck for 3 miles until they decapitated him. This woman was pushing me to get me to say something. And all I could say was, well, ma'am, because I heard my wife's words. Well, ma'am, that is an opinion. It's a pretty unique one, but it's still an opinion. And I still need the key for the training room, please. She pushed the key on the floor, went in the office, and slammed the door behind her so hard the picture on the wall moved. I picked up that key. I went in the training room. I closed the door behind me. I put my back on the door. I slid to the floor, and I sat there and cried. Not because of anything she said, but because I didn't say anything. I erred to the side of caution. I was a coward. I didn't say anything. And every day I tie up and have these conversations, I look for another opportunity to see when I can now speak truth. Because the one thing I've learned is truth doesn't need help. All it needs is light. Making a stand isn't easy. I mentioned to you earlier, as I'm getting ready to wrap this up, that there is an opportunity to download the report. This is the last link that I'll put up for that, but I'm in just a second going to give you another QR code that will allow you to download the first section of the book as a free read. And if you're interested, all you got to do is reach out to me. I'm not trying to sell books. I'll be happy to send you an electronic version of the book. But let me just share a couple of things. This is the link that'll take you to the ability to download the PDF version of the book. So same thing, it's a different QR code than the others that I've shown. So if you point your phone at this one, it'll again take you to a link that will allow you an opportunity, if you're interested, to download a PDF version of the book as well. I'd also love your feedback. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. At some point or another, I am going to put it up on Amazon and do all of that. That's not why I wrote it. So when I do get to that point, I'm sure they're going to ask for some kind of quotes or testimonials or something. So be nice to me if you would, please. Now, closing thoughts. A couple of things I just want to touch bases on, and then I'm going to let you go. One, let me give you some idea of what we do here. This is just an example of some of the project-specific kinds of things that we do. Whether it's assisting organizations to understand how this bullying can manifest and what can be done culturally, whether it's helping organizations to go through their applicant tracking system and find out where might there be bias inherent in causing 50% of women to get through the first gate, but only 10% actually having jobs extended to them, though they were all qualified. This is, again, just an example of the kinds of things we do. Amongst those, we do also provide professional development and training. So if there are people looking for some coursework, we customize as well as have instructor-led and train the trainer where we can license the content for your use. We also do a certificate program for those diversity ambassadors. This is connected to the content that I delivered at the University of Houston for 20 years that gives your people the tools necessary to do the work that you're asking them to, that gives them the opportunity to succeed. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to leave you with a final thought. Adversity is like boiling water. Now that you know about bullying, when you are confronted with it, what are you going to be when bullying comes up? I'll say later this week. It could be later today. When you're confronted with the boiling water of adversity, you have a choice. The choice is to be an egg, a carrot, or a coffee bean. What do I mean by that? A carrot goes into the boiling water of adversity hard, but the water changes the carrot and turns it soft. An egg goes into the boiling water of adversity fragile, but the water changes the egg and turns it hard. But the coffee bean goes into the boiling water of adversity, only the water doesn't change the bean. The bean changes the water. Be coffee beans. That's what we need when the adversity arises. Last thought I want to leave you with. Contact information for both myself as well as our company. If we can be of any assistance with any discussion that you're interested in having on this topic, please don't hesitate. Unfortunately, the forum for how LinkedIn Live works doesn't lend itself to having a discussion. At most, you can convey information and capture some info in the chat feature. So hopefully, if you've chosen to do that, we'll have an opportunity to go through your comments in the chat and be able to respond. The link that you see for the QR code, once again, will take you to the report that you'll be able to download. And if there's any question or any way that we can assist with that, don't hesitate. Cheryl and the team, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be a part of Blue Beyond. And however we can make a difference, I just want to help carry the water in any way to make a difference. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, we've got one more webinar scheduled already. It's coming up in October. That particular webinar is going to be on the real ROI for diversity. That's the return on inclusion. And I'll be walking you through the diversity earnings per share model that allows you to connect the topic of earnings to the top line revenue growth, the bottom line cost reductions, and the pipeline recruiting, retention, and talent management in fiscally quantifiable ways. We've already got about 50 to 100 people that are signed up for that one. We look forward to seeing you as well. Make it a great day. Thanks once again.